By the time my father took me to court, I had already spent most of my life learning how to stand still while people explained me to strangers. She's sensitive, she gets overwhelmed, she never had much ambition. That last one stuck. Maybe because it sounded close enough to truth when repeated for 20 years. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October, cold enough that everyone came into the courthouse carrying tension in their shoulders. I remember watching my father smooth the sleeve of his suit while we waited outside the probate courtroom. Navy wool, silver cufflinks. He looked prepared for victory, not grief. My grandfather had been dead for 11 weeks. The estate was worth somewhere around $11 million. Depending on how the businesses were valued, commercial property, investments, 2 distribution companies, land outside Amarillo, the kind of money people imagine arrives as piles of cash, when really it arrives as paperwork and responsibility and 27 unanswered calls before noon. I was still working restaurant shifts 3 nights a week. That detail became very important to everyone, especially my father. Inside the courtroom, his attorney did most of the talking at first. There were questions about fiduciary competence, concerns about undue influence, comments about my grandfather's declining health during his final years. I listened quietly. That surprised them too. My father had always mistaken silence for weakness. When I was younger, he'd fill every room completely, and eventually you learned there was no space left to speak. Then his attorney mentioned my job. She currently works as a waitress downtown. My father leaned back slightly after that, like the conclusion had arrived naturally on its own. The judge glanced over his glasses at me. A waitress? I nodded once. Something almost amused passed across his face. My father gave a short laugh before he could stop himself. Your Honor, she's just a waitress. Just the words settled into the room comfortably. A familiar coat everyone knew how to wear. The judge looked down at the estate summary again. And she intends to manage all this. A few people behind us laughed softly, not cruelly, exactly, worse than cruelly casually, like the answer was obvious. I remember becoming aware of tiny things then. The sound of someone uncapping a pen. My father tapping one finger against the table, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I also remember thinking, this is the last moment they still believe this version of me. Then the judge said, still half smiling, a waitress managing millions? And I stood. I am. Silence afterward always sounds larger than people imagine. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just absence. The judge waited for me to continue. My attorney finally slid a folder across the table. Thick, organized, color-coded tabs. My grandfather liked paper trails. I spoke carefully because anger would have made me look exactly how they expected. My grandfather appointed me acting operations coordinator 6 years ago. The judge's expression changed slightly. I continued. At first, I handled vendor reconciliation and payroll review for Westline distribution, then compliance reporting, insurance negotiations, property tax disputes, eventually cash flow management during acquisitions. My father stared at me like I'd begun speaking another language, which, in a way, I had. The judge opened the folder. I watched him move through documents one by one, signed authorizations, tax filings, bank approvals, tenant correspondence, meeting records. There were hundreds of pages because my grandfather documented everything. Every expanded responsibility, every authority transfer, every quarterly review. The judge stopped smirking around page 15. My father's attorney interrupted first. These responsibilities appear administrative in nature. They include fiduciary authorization. The judge said without looking up. Another silence, this one different. I could feel the room recalculating me in real time, and oddly, it didn't feel satisfying, mostly exhausting. My father leaned forward finally. Why would he hide this? I almost answered immediately. Because you never looked. But grief has a way of sanding down sharp responses before they leave your mouth. So instead I said he didn't hide it. The truth sat there between us. My grandfather had started bringing me into meetings when I was 23, quietly at first. I'd sit in corners taking notes while men twice my age ignored me completely. Afterward, he'd ask questions during the drive home. What did you notice? Who lied? Who was nervous? Why? He never spoke about confidence. He spoke about attention. Years later, while everyone else argued at holidays or disappeared into their own lives, I was the one reviewing shipping losses with him at midnight. I was the one sitting beside his hospital bed, balancing vendor accounts because he hated unfinished work. And yes, sometimes I still serve tables afterward, because real life is usually less symbolic than people want it to be. The judge asked me several more questions. I answered all of them, not brilliantly, just accurately. That seemed to matter more. My father grew quieter as the hearing continued. Not embarrassed exactly. Something narrower than that, disoriented. He knew the value of my grandfather's estate, but not the machinery underneath it. And certainly not the person maintaining parts of that machinery for years without recognition. Near the end, the judge removed his glasses and looked directly at my father. It appears your father entrusted her with substantial responsibility long before his death. No one laughed after that. The challenge to my appointment didn't disappear immediately, but the direction of the hearing changed completely. What had begun as skepticism became verification. Procedural, serious, professional. By the time we left the courtroom, people avoided looking at me the way they had earlier. A few even nodded politely. I hated that more than the laughter. Outside, my father stopped beside the courthouse steps, while reporters hovered at a distance near the curb. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said, very quietly, "You should told me." I looked at him for a long time. Then I said the truest thing I had understood since childhood. "You never asked." He didn't follow me after that. I walked to my car alone, carrying two banker's boxes full of estate files. The same kind I'd carried for years already. Nothing about my life felt victorious. My grandfather was still gone. My father still didn't know me. And the strangest part was realizing that proving my competence changed almost nothing inside me. It only changed the room. But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes silence breaking in your favor is the closest thing to justice you get.